Welcome to Leaping the Abyss, a set of 7 podcasts hosted by Gail and Matt Taylor designed to help listeners think about their own agency and world perspective, and how individual ideas, values, actions, and beliefs help to shape and give life to the emerging paradigm, by design or default. Each of the 7 podcasts has a different interviewer, each familiar with the particular subject being explored. These roughly 30-minute interviews are more questions than answers, more nudging than perspective. For the second of the series, please welcome Greg Sarikoff and the topic, Don't You See How Many Lives We've Saved?
Hello, Gail. Hello, Matt.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Greg. It's nice to be with you this morning, or this afternoon for you.
Afternoon for me, yes. So we're here together to speak about a number of topics around transition managing. And I was struck by this terminology. I'm not sure I fully understand what it means. And do you have any alternative naming for this concept, maybe that we can remember of?
Well, back when we were looking at paradigm shifts and moving from one paradigm to another, and of course that's exactly the condition that we are in right now. When we started 20, 40 years ago, it was more a this is going to happen, and now of course it's happening. And we came up with the concept of transition manager. A lot of people thought, oh, is that someone who's controlling it? No, it just means man is hand, someone who is in it and understands it. And our idea was that the transition manager had a foot in both paradigms. In other words, had competency and understanding, and he could help people leaping the abyss. Because when the paradigms are just kind of starting to come and new ones are coming around, it's an idea. People talk about it, they argue about it, they don't pay too much attention to it. Then you get into a situation like we are today, and suddenly there's this huge gap, and you have to stop doing what you were and learn to do something else, therefore leaping the abyss, which is
another thing that I think is really important is we have a 7 domains model, and that's what we're managing. We're managing the elements, not people. And so when we started our process many years ago, we said, well, you can't manage people, and that's almost it's not a good idea to try and manage people. But if you surround them with competency in terms of educational systems, technology, understanding the business as a whole, et cetera, then people will do the right thing through these different patterns and different intersections where these different domains come together. So it's never been about transition manager, the manager as a person who's managing other people.
Or controlling.
Or controlling, yeah.
And when we come to big issues, big global issues, that's even more important. Instead of, governments have their role, but in governments coming in and insisting and causing and making and punishing and rewarding, their job is to create a stable system in which then this kind of creative activity can thrive.
And if it doesn't mean controlling, is it a sort of job that I can undertake? Is it something more like a mission, or is it a task?
I think it's a talent and a skill, both developmental. I think another thing we looked at when we started change our way of working and thinking about it, it was more with self-organizing systems, and as nature would do it. It's sapiential. It doesn't come from the top necessarily. It's with vision that people step up and say, I can do this piece. So in a way, we're all transition managers today by design or by default. And my work, I think, is to attract people. So the sapiential leadership model that we created is for self-organizing systems, knowing that within a major constraint or challenge or question, that when I feel that I have the skill and the information, I step up and say, I can take this piece and I can bring my skills to bear here. So you ask, is it a job? I hope it never becomes an official title where you're worth so much money because you are a transition manager, because I think that takes away the self-organizing patterns that are trying to emerge now. As we leap the abyss, we're trying new things.
Yeah, so you're mentioning.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're mentioning this leaping the abyss. I know it's the title of a book where we can find lots of insights about your ways of thinking. But also, I'm wondering if I'm supposed to leap an abyss. It's a risky move, and should I be here and there at the same time?
Let me.
Am I stuck somewhere in between?
Answer that.
Yeah, I'll tell you where it came from. We were working years and years ago on the F-15 to create a new model of it, and the commander in charge of that multi-year process and multi-billion-dollar trillion, a very expensive thing, had a large team, and he was responsible for every F-15 all over the world, no matter who owned it. And it was his job to keep them flying. And so he had this very large team, and they were going through this huge transformation. And so right before that book was written, it was written about a design shop. He had his team there with a lot of other companies' teams. He explained that what he did, he said, I took all my people up to the abyss, and I said, stare down there. And it was infinitely deep. And he said, now, we either step into it or we leap it. and the metaphor that he was using at the time is that really good anticipatory design and good thinking and proper planning, you can avoid having to leap. But you come sometimes where the crisis is so big, or where you haven't been paying attention, and then you get into that moment. And I think we're, as a society, very close to that kind of a moment now, where we have to do some leaping. And we have to understand that if we don't leap, that in fact, they'll be pretty catastrophic, some of the outcomes.
I think parkour, is that what it's called? That leaping is one of the fastest growing sports today. So I watch these people leaping from roof to roof, and it's like, no, that's not, is that what I have to do for leaping the abyss? Kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting that sport is growing so fast today.
I'm happy you mentioned parkour, because it's the name of a process that we actually fine-tuned here in France to accompany organizations with swarm innovation projects. We named it parkour, just like the sport.
Interesting. So,
and, yes, please go ahead.
But I want to say also that, life is a process. As Bucky Fuller reminds us, we're all verbs. And we get stuck thinking we're somewhere, but we're changing constantly. And so this leaping, my premise is, as we leap, as we ask new questions, as we discover what this abyss is, we're learning as we go. And if we would get more comfortable with learning as we go as a process, rather than seeking deterministic answers, the abyss is going to be a lot easier to get across, because we're going to do it more or less together. And we're going to do it almost step by step, but from a future vision.
Yeah, I know that. Remember when we were children, we learned to skip. As adults, we don't do that. But if you really think about what children are doing in skipping, it's really quite amazing. And it was a natural thing. You just learned to do it. Everybody did it. You skipped down the road. And it was without stress and very, very much fun. And as adults, we have to pace and walk. Very serious.
So I understand that behind the concept, there are there are a number of design principles. Like I think I understood one of them a few seconds ago when you mentioned the fact that actually you're here and there at the same time. So it's a movement, it's a dynamic process. It's never static. What other strong design principles do you see that we should be aware of?
In increasing your past and future horizons, because it's much easier to see patterns emerging with longer time frames. And we today tend to think about the past and the present, and the future is out there scary, and we don't believe in it, and we don't know how to make it work. And my suggestion is that's how anything happens. You get an idea to invent something. It's in your head, it's a vision. It may take 5 years, it may take 20 years, but we need to begin doing this as a society, as cultures, and leaping out to what do we want? What does it mean to live in 2070 or 2080 in terms of the things we wish for? It's not determining whether we're going to have war, whether we're going to have plastic, whether we're going to do this or that. It's like my environment in 2070 or for my family is going to be in cycle with nature. We're going to be working as nature, understanding how the world works. That doesn't mean we're going to get rid of businesses. We're going to get rid of all of this stuff. It means we're going to reframe. And so I look at what do I want to be reframed and how do we create this higher order?
Yeah, we have this axiom, as I know you that are aware, you can't get there from here because the you that arrives is not the you that started the journey. Also, that model of there may be very useful, but it's probably not where you're actually going to end up. You're going to, because of the model itself, you're going to end up someplace else. But you can bring there to here every day. You can bring that vision to here. You get a little bit more of there every day. And if you think about that in this kind of continuous change, and the notion, who was it who said if you don't have a
Maria Rilke.
Yeah, what is it? How many?
He was looking at a couple thousand years.
Yeah, he said the poet, if you don't have that kind of a vision, you're doomed. You're actually doomed. And I think that's very real.
That's super demanding because it means that you have to build tomorrow with today's constraints.
No, not the constraints. The difference, you see, the difference between that vision and the present reality, no matter how good or bad that reality is, the difference between them then creates a dialogue and a series of, and then out of it comes a new model.
If you take those constraints too seriously, you'll never get a vision because it will be all the things that don't work today in your mind. So you're trying to leap over that. So that there to here allows you to get up in the morning and say, what little piece of there, what am I going to read? What am I going to search for in books today or the magazines, or what conversations am I going to listen to, or what are my hands going to do today toward realizing that vision? What can I make a model? Can I do this or can I do that? But it also demands that we go back in time and understand major changes in history or inflection points. And because all those inflection points are opportunities where a whole bunch of new stuff started, mostly. And so we understand that, can take it forward and say, well, then where are they leading to? But the power of vision, we tell the story of Michelangelo when he created David. He bought a damaged piece of marble.
Had a hole in it.
And the story is, it had a big hole in it. And the story is, and of course, David came out of his carving. And so somebody said, how did you do that? How did you get that? And he said, well, I carved away everything that wasn't David. Well, because he had to have a vision of what that meant. So it was the interaction between the two, and it's the interaction between life, reality, and my vision that I'm constantly monitoring.
And is it a sequence, like a prerequisite? If I want to do things, I need to elaborate a vision beforehand. Otherwise, I'm doomed. I cannot do anything valuable. Can I start trying, without a clear vision of where I'm heading?
I think clear is definitely not a requisite, because I don't think many new ideas are clear. So, in fact, there's a wonderful quote about from, is it David Bohm, Niels Bohr?
Niels Bohr.
Where he's checking somebody's vision, and he's saying, two scientists, so they're deep into quantum physics and quantum mechanics and things. And one of them says to the other, it's not that we doubt your observation or your research. It's whether it's crazy enough to be true or not. Because at first, no one, including the inventor or designer, understands. And to everyone else, it's like, what? But even to the designer, to you, Greg, as you reach out and say, I want to create this center, I want to create this way of working. You don't have it clear in the beginning. You take those steps, and those steps help define and maybe even change course, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, it gets back to that dialogue. As a very young person, 10 years old or something, I decided I wanted to become an architect. Well, so finally I found a little Boy Scout manual that how to get an architectural bags, and I did all the exercises, got a drawing board, and you take those little steps. But it's that dialogue between the outside goal. And I started going to architects' offices and asking for a job when I was 12 years old. And they kind of looked at me and kind of smiled. But they were very nice, and they were very kind about it. They didn't blow me out. They were, in a way, kind of intrigued. And finally, at 17 years old, I got a job with the biggest architectural firm in the world, and I never looked back. I never went back to school. I just went into architecture. And so, did I know that that was the way it was going to happen? No. But the fact was, because I kept that dialogue going and learning as much as I could by myself, I went through college drafting when I was still in high school and had to take it at night. But that's the way it works. It's a dynamic back and forth. And all along, my concept of architecture changed as I had my experiences with Frank Lloyd Wright and other architects. It changed and it grew, but there was a part of it that never changed. It just was like a laser all the way through.
Is there any space left for neutrality? Like, people say that being a transition manager is being a facilitator in a collaborative mode, and that you should stay neutral and avoid influencing too much whatever emerges. So
in that role, if you're taking that role, you have a fiduciary duty to all sides. Not a fiduciary duty and an allegiance to one side, because you can't.
Agreement.
You could be an advocate, and if you're an advocate and you're going to be an advocate, you say you're going to be an advocate. That's fine, but that's not the transition manager function. That third function is to facilitate and to have a fiduciary duty to everybody in it.
In that way, Greg, because I get so upset with what's going on in this existing paradigm as it's dying and trying to hold on with all of its strength, is I'm realizing it's dissolving. And so it's not that we dislike a lot of the elements of the existing paradigm. It's that we don't like the way it's being politicized and operated, and money and power have taken such incredible roles. So we begin dissolving that and picking up the pieces that we know will be in the new paradigm. We just don't know exactly how or what the order is, but they're going to give way. The old is going to give way to more dynamic citizen participation, ways of working. Who knows? But we know they're changing, and so we try and help them along each day. But that doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything either on both sides. You can disagree.
Yeah, I can give you an example that when we started MG Taylor and started this process, it took us about a year, but we articulated 3 goals that we wanted to bring to this transformation, which we saw in the work that we did in the 70s. So we had been playing with these ideas for well over a decade before we even started MG Taylor. The 3 goals were to help people facilitate, help people, as transition manager role, help people move from this old paradigm to the new one. And we said, the fact there's going to be this huge global paradigm shift isn't in question, but people are not prepared for that, because that only happens once every so many centuries, right? That you get this huge kind of change. And we said, we wanted to, and this is kind of putting it crudely, but at the time we wanted to get people to think about it. We wanted to minimize the blood on the street. In times like this in the past, it's usually a war or a catastrophe that wakes people up, and a lot of people die unnecessarily. So eliminate the blood on the street. We wanted to make it so that when they got there, and the old paradigm intellectually all the way through all the physical systems changed, is to change it in a way, when they had influence, to change it in a way that the new paradigm wasn't corrupted with so many old ideas or false ideas that it had a very short lifetime and it would collapse again very quickly. So in other words, a really good piece of self-analysis and philosophy and engineering and doing the right things, so that in fact they could be requisite with that new world that they were in fact creating. And so that was our goal with the work. Our vision, which we talk about, but we don't impose, we don't try to get people to do that, was, I'm sure you're familiar with it, to recreate planet Earth as a garden and a work of art for all living systems, for all living beings. That was the big meta goal to us. Well, we're not going to go out and do that. All we can do is be good transition managers in the sense of helping people create the future that they want.
And in respect to that, so when I was on the High Line in New York, it's like, oh, somebody's got our vision, recreating Earth as a work of art. They took an old railroad track and that had been destroyed and in very poor condition and turned it into one of the most popular sites in New York.
And it's a garden.
And as a garden.
A couple stories in the air.
You know, and so that, but that became part of my puzzle. Look what they're doing. And in other words, a vision is a collection of good ideas and patterns and feedback and loops like this in terms of spurring you and others forward.
And you speak about gardening. Can we take permaculture as an analogy for this effort? And if we do, in this lapse of time where I stop doing the old-fashioned way and I prepare for the land to produce by itself, nothing is produced in this middle range between the two paradigms, and I starve. How do you deal with that?
Creating the field instead of just having conversations, but creating the place where people can feel and walk about and exchange information freely and stuff like this. One more thing, I recently watched The Biggest Little Farm, which is a wonderful movie. And in it, they had no idea how they were going to get the money. They just had this crazy vision. They pulled all their friends together, and guess what? They found millions of dollars to create their vision. So it's a searching, and it's a feeling constantly of pulling ideas together to see what's going to have the stickiness to create a bigger possibilities.
Yes.
Yes.
So let's go back to Bucky Fuller a second. There's a perfect example of a transition manager. You know, he was a failure, and he almost committed suicide. He actually stood on a bridge and looked down into the water, and this voice kind of said to him, "You're not done. You don't have the right. You know." And he started his work planning decades ahead. And the story that is kind of behind this particular theme, he was teaching at Black Mountain College, which was a very, very wonderful program in the 30s, 40s, early 50s. And he was teaching people how to build a geodesic dome. Now, Bucky at this point was not famous, and he was getting his patents, and he was trying to get people to understand about his ideas of structures and how they could save money and space and everything. And so he gave them the assignment to develop this geodesic dome and build it. It took the whole summer period to do that. And one of his specifications that they could lay it all out in pieces and then pull these lines, and it would just come up and become this large geodesic dome. And so they got out there and they all pulled, and the dome went up, and it was magnificent. And right at the point when it was just about ready, it just fell down all into pieces. No. And they were just sitting there. Some were crying, some were sitting on the ground. We have failed, and everything. And Bucky was dancing up and down. He's a little short guy. He was always very animated. He said, don't you see how many lives we have saved today? Because he wasn't sitting there to defend his ideas. He wasn't there worrying about whether this particular example would work or not. He was watching, and he saw the failure. He saw the mistake that they had all made. He wasn't trying to defend his dome. He was looking at it in an objective way, so to speak. And I think that's a beautiful example of the kind. It's not all theory, it's hands-on, it's doing, it's then taking the feedback, and it's learning, and it's going from future to present, present to future. And I think that is a perfect model of what we're trying to say.
Are there any other exercises if I want to train to become a better transition manager? Anything you can recommend to become fit in this sport?
Well, you know, from what we know, what you're doing right now can't get better. I think you're doing
I was going to say, right now, the virus is our best teacher. So, I mean, and really to look at all the opportunities that are coming out and all the things we're seeing differently that we didn't even have our eye on, but now we're looking at so many different things. You know, how do you do things virtually that used to be face to face, and how do you educate your kids at home every day with them not going to school? How do you live as a family when you're not in and out all the time? I mean, there's so many different questions people are asking today, and the spontaneity is fabulous as far as I'm concerned. Oh, you need masks? We can make masks. Oh, you need this? We can do this. You know, we're just stepping up. And that practice of stepping up is exactly what you're talking about. It's starting to do. And those people, you think they won't have ideas in their head when they're finished with this? What do I do next? Can I turn this into a product? What do I need to do? You know, all of these kinds of things. So managing crises as opportunity And as transition managing the liminality, that ambiguous closing of one way we know and opening another way that we don't know, we're doing it together. And that's the most precious thing that virus can show us today.
One can imagine that a transition manager would be frustrated and upset because he's not well prepared enough, because it's a very risky move, because he doesn't know where he's going, because he's probably not skilled enough to do it. And I see that you have this beautiful, positive energy of two people who are really not frustrated at all. And I want to thank you for that, because it's this is a great lesson, and it makes me full of hope for the next paradigm.
Being couples helped.
Yeah. Well,
because when one of them was down, the other one kind of grabbed him by the ears.
I can remember so many times when I would walk out and say, I'm not doing that. And so I would have to step in until he felt comfortable to step in, and the same with me. You know, I would give up, and Matt would say, no, you don't give up. You know, and he would then be at the forefront for a while. So it's that I do believe very much of never going it alone. I mean, we never do anyway, when you really think about all the processes that we need. But when we think we're the lone creator, it's just simply won't work as well.
Yeah, that's just a useless arrogance.
Yeah. So I think our time's about up, Greg. This has been
thank you very much.
Time.
Yes,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon again.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye.
Be sure to check out the next interview in the Leaping the Abyss series, So What Happens Then, with Jesko Vandensteiner. You can also find more information on each podcast by visiting bodyofknowledge.online.